Your brain on climate.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Your Brain on Climate, the show about human brains versus the climate crisis. I'm Dave. Now then, before we get going, indulge me for a second. Back in 2020, just before, literally just before, the world was, unbeknownst to me at the time, about to lock everything down, back then, I quit my job. My job at the time was a good, greeny job in a good, greeny organisation. It was pretty senior. I was lucky to have it, but I'd had enough. Not just of that job. In fact, at the time, I thought, like all greeny jobs, all greeniness, I felt, and I honestly felt at the time, that I was done. I was definitely burned out, whatever that means. Now, there were lots of reasons I got to that point, almost all of which I'm not going to go into right now. I recorded an episode of my other podcast, Sustainababble, all about it at the time. There's a link in the show notes. But one of the things that I remember feeling very, very strongly at that time, well, look, here's me talking about it with my Sustainababble co-host, Ol, back then. Than I think it is now. I used to think that there were good guys and there were bad guys. And there was...
So Jeremy Corbyn and everyone else.
Yeah, it was slightly longer ago than that I'm talking about.
Michael Foot and everyone else.
All that had to happen was you had to foment a revolution, and it would there'd be enough people who want the good thing to happen, and that's not the bad thing happen. No climate change, happy kittens, save ugly fish, everything fine, right? And the longer I've been doing this for, the more I think it don't work like that. It doesn't work like that. For a start, people are not good or evil. People are not one thing or the other. I'm sick to bloody death. And I think a large part of this is politics has done this to me. I am sick to bloody death, honestly, of there's us and there's them, of tribes, of good and evil, of right and wrong. Just listen to that sad, mopey little sod. Anyway, looking back at it now, I think what I was doing was admitting something out loud that had been kind of chewing away at me for ages. And that was that I no longer felt like an activist anymore. Despite having been climate campaigning and climate advocating in various forms for the best part of 20 years. But no, that's not quite it. It's not that I didn't feel like an activist. I didn't feel like I wanted to carry on acting like an activist. Do you know what I mean? The performance, wearing the clothes, metaphorically speaking, carrying on in the way that I felt an activist is supposed to behave, thinking in the way that I felt like an activist was supposed to think, and beating myself up for not being good at it. I was trying to cling on to a story about there being good guys, me, and some bastards, everyone else, when I just wasn't quite sure it weren't a bit more complicated than that. Culturally, psychologically speaking, and in terms of actually situating myself in the world in a way that made sense anymore. And what I think it is, more than anything, was there's a script of being an activist. There's a lot of things you're supposed to say and do and believe. And I got sick of it.
I'm 28. This is 27th COP conference. And what has happened every single year? The emissions have risen and risen and risen. If you were doing your job properly, everyone would be out on the streets.
So we have a
But
day.
they're not.
So
I really want you to understand. Do you know how grave the situation is?
I do understand.
And do you have children?
I've got children.
And do you love those children?
This episode is all about the activist's script. An unacknowledged, subconscious, profoundly interesting, group-cohering, identity-reinforcing, sometimes useful, sometimes highly problematic set of beliefs that many activists can hold about themselves.
I have noticed a set of patterns that happen when people, including myself, try to make the world better. After getting on for 3 decades of noticing these patterns, I'm wondering if we could pay attention to them with a view to doing this more effectively.
That's Anthea Lawson. She's my guest for this episode. She is amazing. She's written a book which has connected with me quite deeply, as you'll hear as we go through this. Her book is called How Not to Save the World, and it is all about those patterns that script?
So I think, and this is based on lots of interviews and sort of self-examination, I think this script says, 1, I'm good. 2, I protest. 3, I am pure. 4, I know better than you.
Oh, God.
5,
I feel very seen. But yeah, carry on.
5, I save people. 6, I'm a hero. And 7, I must save the world now, which is about, the urgency and panic of it.
Anthea says that these patterns, these ways of thinking about yourself, when you're an activist, they infuse a great deal of kind of progressive movements for change and the people within them, and much of the culture of activism. And Anthea worries, and I think she's right, that on balance, they do 2 things. Firstly, they push away more people than they attract, damaging the cause. And secondly, they cause activists to turn on each other and, like I did, burn out, thus damaging the activists. Lots of the things in this episode are very close to home for me, and maybe they will be for you. I feel seen, as I say about 1,000 times too. That's all right. It really is all right. The important thing to know about this episode before we go any further is it's not about shaming anyone. Anthea's got this script. I've got this script. You might have this script too. That's all right. Instead, what we're doing, with, I hope, love and compassion, is exploring where these patterns come from in our brains, our cultural myths, our stories, and our identities, and how we might change the world and be people that change the world better if we understand this script and try and amend it a bit. So, stay tuned for my chat with the fabulous Anthea Lawson in this episode of Your Brain on Climate.
Your brain on climate.
Now, before we get going, just the usual bit of housekeeping. This is a 100% listener-supported podcast. That's something that really matters to me, and it's increasingly hard to do, I'll level with you, in this age of capitalism ruining podcasting, just like it's ruining football. I am truly grateful to the people who chuck in a couple of quid from their hard-earned dosh because they love the show. It keeps things going. It allows me to pay my guests for their time, including, of course, Anthea, and your support can help too. So if you'd like to join them, please chip in over at wobblywobblywobbly.patreon.com/yourbrainonclimate. I'll be jolly humbled and jolly pleased. And if you can't do that or you won't do that, that's fine. I'd love it if you could leave me a review at your podcast medium of choice. A 5-star one and some words of endorsement would be ace. You can email me, hello@yourbrainonclimate.com. If you've got any thoughts on the show, I do love to hear from you. And remember, if you hear this noise, it denotes wisdom. It means there'll be something in the show notes for you to check out at your leisure. Right, on with it. My chat with Anthea. I hope you enjoy. I hope it pushes your buttons in the right way. And if I don't get the chance to say so again, I'm sure I will, do go and buy Anthea's book, How Not to Save the World, which, by the way, I am in. Anthea, thank you for coming on Your Brain on Climate. Who are you? And say a bit about your book.
Yeah, my name's Anthea Lawson. I'm a writer and campaigner, and I have just published a book called How Not to Save the World, which is about how we can do good better by getting to grips with our internal saviour complex.
So, Anthea, you have written about a script that people who are trying to save the world and change the world, activists, people like you and me, people like us, maybe when we were younger, carry around with us, this script that guides us subconsciously. What is that script?
Yeah, so I think, and this is based on lots of interviews and sort of self-examination, I think this script says, 1, I'm good. 2, I protest. 3, I am pure. 4, I know better than you.
Oh, God.
5,
I feel very seen. But yeah, carry on.
5, I save people. 6, I'm a hero. And 7, I must save the world now, which is about, the urgency and panic of it. Now, a couple of things to say. Yes, they do. This script definitely applies when people are coming into activism for the first time because it's unconscious, it's in the culture, and so it's easy to pick up. But just the fact that I'm now getting a bit grey-haired doesn't mean it doesn't still affect me. I think there's some aspects here that are about being human. I'd noticed every single instruction on it affecting me as I was trying to write this book, for example.
Oh, interesting.
Which would be another whole podcast. I'm constantly now checking myself. I'm like, oh, right, okay. And picking up on the alternatives because, the antidotes to it are there. The other thing I noticed that I really wanted to say, when I got to the end of the book and I'd finished writing it, it was just when Reform UK was they'd just had their infusions of quite a few £1 million from a crypto billionaire and who lives offshore. And it was all kind of like really starting to get noisy. And I was like, hang on, everyone's doing this. The script, that save, I must do something now feeling. Those narratives are being picked up on all sides. So I think there's something here that is about what happens when we're activating very old stories when we're kind of going into battle. That call to war has a deep effect on our psyche. And that's what we're getting into if we do it without thinking. But I also think it has particular impacts for progressive work.
Yeah, and your point is that it's bad for the people doing that work, and it's bad for the change you're trying to make. Ultimately, these things are bad.
It's just not. There's an. I don't like using the word bad here because there's an inevitability to it. Because I think some of it is part of being human. Some of it is about living with centuries of class and empire and their effects on the culture and on our psyches. But the important bit is that there are antidotes. And it doesn't have to be like this, which means that change-making can become perhaps more effective for those of us already doing it, and perhaps a more appealing prospect for those who currently look at it and think, oh, God, that's not me. I've been campaigning for a long time. I have worked for NGOs working on human rights and the environment. I've, tried hanging out on permaculture projects, planting trees, growing hydroponically watered vegetables. I was part of Extinction Rebellion. I've got involved in community stuff. I'm involved in anti-far right stuff now, community democracy, all sorts of things. And I have noticed a set of patterns that happen when people, including myself, try to make the world better. Yeah, after getting on for 3 decades of noticing these patterns, I'm wondering if we could pay attention to them with a view to doing this more effectively. Now, it's a bit fraught talking about this in some ways because we're up against so much. Like, look what's just been going on in the last couple of years. Genocide, war, the rise of the far right, global heating is continuing. I don't need to sort of outline all of the symptoms here for your listeners, I'm guessing. And I don't want this in any way to sound like, oh, well, it's our fault we're not winning, right? We're up against, I don't want to give people more sort of sticks to beat themselves with. We're up against a lot. And are there things that we could do differently? Are there patterns that we get in that don't help us? That's what I got curious about.
I mean, I feel like this is a book written for me. I can't tell you. I feel so seen in this.
Which of you is feeling seen? Tell me.
All of me is feeling seen, right? Because basically, what you're doing in this book is 3 things. A lot of which, kind of like anyone who's listened to this podcast knows, I just spend a lot of time banging on about. Which is firstly like a bit of a personal story of like, I've been doing this for ages. This trying to save the world stuff, and I started out as this fresh-faced little thing, thinking all you had to do was hoist a few placards and tell people some facts, smash capitalism, simple, job done, bosh, right? And kind of realising it doesn't work like that. And almost like I had, as people who listen to my previous podcast, Sustainable know, I had a moment about, when was it, just before the pandemic, of kind of like a crisis about it, burnout and going, right, Anthea, I think we met then. I talked to you originally
That's
about
right.
that, and it's just going, I don't want to do this like this anymore. This isn't working for me. I'm tired and I'm burnt out, and the world is evidently not better. So a personal journey, but then also, as you say, you're looking at you're looking at the you call it a script that people have, who are, and not everybody does all bits of this, but kind of the activist script, the change the world kind of script that is so internalized that we often don't stop to look at it. So say more about that script. And then as we go through, I can tell you all the ways in which you've seen me and made me feel unoriginal and small.
Yeah, that's not the idea. It's, I wanted to make people feel a bit more sane, actually. And that was some of the response I got to my first book as well, The Entangled Activist, because just writing some of this stuff down that often we don't have time to talk about when we're busy campaigning, or, if we're busy doing a job that's not campaigning and then trying to campaign in our spare time. We're just busy, right? Everyone's busy. And it's like, oh, hang on. Somebody said this. Hold on. So look, scripts are, I find a script is a useful, it's a useful concept, really. It's a useful way of conceptualizing something that's going on that is psychosocial. That's my way of thinking. What I'm trying to do is bring together psychology and, I guess, sociology, like what goes on in the social sphere, which is basically crossing the Cartesian divide here. Our culture for hundreds of years has said what goes on within us is separate to material reality, and in every way, like anyone who's sort of understood how illness works, and our mind and our body are connected, like it's connected in society as well. So we are affected by what goes on within us, and we are affected by what is going on outside, and we are shaped by what's going on outside, and our psyches are shaped by what goes on in the world and the culture that we're raised in, that we live in, and vice versa. The state of our psyches help create the world by allowing by allowing vengeful, insecure old men to have powerful positions. Their psyches are currently being projected upon the world on a large scale, right? So here's this principle that it's both. And the script then is saying a bunch of things. I've done a chapter for each in the book that I think are the kind of underground assumptions, kind of operating instructions, if you like a machine metaphor. Choose your metaphor, but they shape, without us really thinking about them. They're not necessarily visible, but then they come out in the behaviour, how we approach activism. And some of them are more psychological, and some of them are a mixture of, I think, psyche and culture. So the script starts with, and I've ordered it this way because I think this first one we have to look at first. It says, I am good. And that's the first thing we think when we're trying to do good. It's like, well, we're on the right side.
Yeah.
You've
got to think that, right? Like you're
yeah, well, of course.
Do you because everyone, Donald Trump probably thinks? Does Donald Trump think? Well, most people probably think that the thing they're doing,
exactly.
Yeah.
There are a bunch of these that everyone thinks, but I think they have a particular effect when people are doing activism for progressive causes, which basically brings with it, and of course you need that to motivate you. There's a positive and a negative to each bit. The flip side is righteousness. It's sort of behaving and speaking in ways that are actually like pretty intolerable for most people to listen to, because who wants to be told what to do by someone who thinks they're right? It's incredibly annoying.
And because I am good, it kind of like, it justifies anything I might do because I am doing it.
So that's the next point. It creates a means versus ends problem that you can justify all sorts of things, or it's kind of cover. It's cover for even if you're trying to do things by good means. It's cover. It creates a shadow. And Jungian psychology tells us that the stuff that's in shadow, we're blind to what is going on if we've got a certain sort of image of ourselves.
I mean, this is a thing. So, right, now, listen, Anthea's just talked about Jungian psychology. What is that? Because that's a thing that people will hear in the same way they hear people banging on about Freud and all of this. And they might go, oh, yeah, Freud, right? What is, in an essence, Jungian psychology? And what relationship does it have to this?
Yeah, Jung was interested in, so just to take one step back, I'm interested in like all psychoanalytic thinkers, of whom Freud is the most famous because he founded this way of thinking and seeing people, are basically saying there is more to what is going on in us than our consciously avowed statements might reveal. There is stuff that we don't know about, basically. So the particular idea that I'm speaking about here, that Jung wrote about, was this idea of the shadow, which is the stuff that we are unaware of in ourselves. And it's not like a bad thing. We all have it. The poet Robert Bly called it the long bag that we carry behind us.
Oh, God.
So it's, as we're growing up, all of the bits of ourselves that are not acceptable in our family, in our culture, in our setting.
Stuff we're ashamed of.
Put away. Yeah. They're not gone, but we're carrying them around. So in this view, you spend the first, as you come into adulthood, you have to do that. So you get to adulthood as a young person, and you've inevitably done some of that. It is inevitable. Jung's view was that, in the second half of life, you can become more whole by, and it's just an inevitable developmental process. It's part of the nature of being human, by starting to recognize what some of those things might be. That can be a bit painful because you've built an idea of yourself by then. Anyway, so more generally then, this idea of the shadow of being good is, I see myself as someone who's good. That doesn't allow me then to see the ways in which maybe I might not be being good. Now, that's not going to be, most people who are trying to do good things for the world don't end up doing terrible things. Some do. There have been a series of scandals in charities in the UK over the last 10 years, which are easy to find if you Google. Oxfam was a really big one, but there were plenty of others. But I'm interested in the strategic implications of this bit of the script, because one of the, leaving aside whether you're good or not, what it allows you to think is that being good is enough, and therefore it's enough just to moralize. Now, actually, it is not a communication strategy. This is why it's funny timing that I've ended up, maybe it's inevitable, maybe this was the way it was going to be, that I've ended up writing and thinking about this over these years when so many more people are turning to, you could call it activism, you could call it being involved in political life, talking about politics. Things are much more, because of the polarization that's going on, because of the threats we face. Far more people are engaged in, political discourse than was the case 10 years ago or 20 years ago, certainly 30 years ago. And so it's very easy coming into it to kind of make all these assumptions according to those bits of the script. So I'm interested in these are inevitable bits of human behavior, but what are the strategic implications?
Presenter Dave here. Now look, it's kind of basic psychology stuff, right? But something that I hope I've realised over the years is that very few things are as likely to make me not want to do a thing as someone coming up to me and shouting at me that I must do that thing. I am in that regard very much like my cat. But absolutely no one, I don't think, likes to be hectored and banged on at by someone else, particularly when what that hectoring is trying to do is tell you that someone else has a different view about the world that you should have, that you should think or behave differently, when you don't see something particularly wrong with how you think or behave in the first place. When that happens, I am definitely more likely to conclude that person is an arsehole, sod off, than I am to think, yes, you're right, everything I've thought about the world hitherto is wrong. If you get someone's back up and you make them feel they're a bad person, that they're under attack, then what are you going to do? You're going to go into a defensive mode. It's like that fight or flight bit of our brain that evolved to keep us safe when a tiger came around, the amygdala inside our head, it kicks in. We revert to the mentality of the playground fight. We reach for whatever tools we've got lying around, metaphorically speaking, and we try and smack our opponent in the head with it. We don't, when we feel under attack, have time or inclination to quietly think and reason. Nothing good for civilized debate ever happens when people are in defensive mode, and persuading people is just about impossible, as Anthea explains.
Next bit of the script, I protest. Now, again, the positive, of course we need to protest. We need to do all of that. That's how we won our rights. All of that. I would set out in a lot more detail for a different audience, that needs convincing that protest actually is a thing, because they've been inhaling lots of messages about it being terrible coming from the right-wing press. Of course that's important, but what I'm talking about is the way we adopt a protest voice in so many of our interactions.
Oh, yeah. Oh, good Lord, yeah, right. Banging on at people. Banging on, getting upset. So, do you mean the kind of thing like when you're in the pub, right? And you talk to someone in the pub, and there's someone in your group, and maybe it's you, who just can't have a laugh about a particular thing, and just will not back down on something, and is so kind of, I will argue a point no matter what, to the extent that they might just come across as an arsehole. What does that look like?
Yeah, so I want to be really careful here, because when somebody is doing that and the point they are making is about the conditions of their own life, so for me, with my positionality, that would be me as a woman talking about experience of misogyny, which I'm in a lot of conversations about at the moment with the ghastly revelations going on about online rape academies and Andrew Tate joining Substack, and all of the Giselle Pellico and all of this. That I don't want to say to anyone who is talking about what they experience that that's not okay to go on about it. That's right for anyone who's experienced anything to be able to talk about it. But I'm thinking about the situations where we would like to be able to persuade somebody. It is not going to work doing that. We're in a situation now where really, both with respect to climate, this is my view, both with respect to climate action, and particularly making ourselves more resilient and, I'm thinking about adaptation in our communities, and in terms of the existential fight in Britain now against the far right, which is going to be an electoral fight in a couple of years against reform. It's already an electoral fight in the local elections, which we'll have the results of by the time this comes out. And, like a general election in a couple of years, 2-3 years. The job it's a kind of horizontal one. It's not that thing, people talk about speaking truth to power. That's one of the kind of cliches about activism. And that's true. You do need to speak truth to power. If you have an opportunity to do so, by all means, you need to do that. But so much of what we need to do now is horizontal. It's organising amongst our communities and our peers and our neighbours, because we need really wide coalitions to resist these forces of the far right, and we need wide coalitions or communities that are joined to do what we're going to need to do to get by with what's already coming. And in those situations, that kind of hectory voice it simply doesn't work.
It don't work for most people, does it? Don't work to be hectored at. I can't think of a time. Can you think of a time that you've changed your mind about something because someone has banged on in a sort of completely unflinching way about that thing?
Right, exactly.
And that, right?
Of course not. And yet, hilariously, I have done it extensively over many years.
God. Yeah, I've done it. I've absolutely done it. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, this is why, I was so seen by this whole exercise. Anyway.
Yeah, but that's the thing. We do all do these things. And so so what I want to offer in the book is alternatives. I want to offer some antidotes, and but both aspects of the book, the distillation of the script and the kind of looking at what the antidotes to it might be came through interview. I've interviewed about 100 people for this book.
Some of them very wise.
Some of them very wise, including yourself, yes. And I interviewed more than 100 people for the last book as well. And I brought the data from that in as well. There, people who've been at it for a while work out some good antidotes to this stuff. I'm not claiming I'm not claiming that any of that is like, me coming up with fantastic ideas. The bit of me that's in this book is my, like deep reflection on the stuff that I've brought to it. And particularly what goes on around class. But maybe we'll come back to that. But yeah, I wanted to try and synthesize some of the enormous, fabulously experienced wisdom that's out there. Because actually, there are all sorts of things that are known about how we can best communicate. Some of them coming from cognitive psychology. Some of them coming from, the other way around. People's lived experience of finding ways to influence. And I wanted to try and put all that together.
What I like about we're only on like point 2 of the 7-point script, so we better hurry up and talk about the other ones. But what I like about each of these chapters, they're all about 50 pages long, these chapters, right, is they start with, for example, there's this thing called the protest voice where, you bang on at people, you can't allow any weakness. But then you start to go, well, why is that? Like, what is going on kind of under the surface? As you say, you bring in things like class. The professional environmental sector is very white and very middle class. And you say these things are relevant. These are relevant things in kind of the tone that you adopt and the way that you argue. But then also you've got your psychology and why is it that we're so afraid to allow any weakness in our own position? Do you want to say a bit more about that?
I think quite a lot of the roots of each of these things that I'm saying that comprise this script are rooted in our own sort of fears and insecurities. That's my observation. And it's tricky this because I can't psychoanalyze other people. I'm going on a kind of felt sense of observing and taking part in things for getting on for 30 years. And some deep reflection on my own sort of situation. And just, I suppose I've developed a nose over the years for when there's more going on than what appears on the surface. Part of me would have loved to be a psychotherapist, but I don't actually I'm really interested in the idea that there is stuff beneath, but I haven't trained to do that because I'm too political. My place is not sitting in one room with individuals. I like writing, and actually I like campaigning. I like campaigning too much. But yeah, this insecurity. So let's take a look at the protest voice. Like, are we overcompensating? Basically, and I really recognise this from situations I've been in where you have to take a line on something. You've got a fairly strong view that ultimately you're in the right direction because there is something fundamentally wrong with the system that you're critiquing, and you've got a policy proposal. And inevitably, we are with a policy proposal, you're taking a narrow slice and quite a mechanistic sort of, this thing is going to make a difference into a very, the way that complexity works is it's very hard to put a linear, change one thing and have a predicted result from it. Life doesn't work like that. But, that's the best you can do with policies. You have to try and sort of line things up like that. So you find yourself arguing for this thing. And of course, and we can get sort of attached to, and I've experienced this, you get attached to, well, this thing is the answer. This thing is the answer, and then you have to say it lots because that's how it becomes. And if we are a bit rigid with that, then when people who, they might not even be vehemently opposed. There are people who are vehemently opposed.
I just have a question and be like, what are you sure?
That's right. But, so let's assume it's not someone who's like ideologically / being paid to oppose you, right? Because there's all that. And we've spent plenty of time arguing with them. And there's no point. But let's just say someone sort of asks a question about it or starts digging into it. We can kind of double down and on the rigid track of arguing it rather than allowing that question to strengthen our argument. It's like, well, okay, that is that is an interesting question. And if somebody who's intelligent is asking that question, then perhaps I do need to think about, like I need to think more broadly around this. But we fear when we're in and rightly and understandably so, we fear when we're in a combative environment that to show any consideration for another point of view will be seen as weakness. And I have to say, the environment we're in at the moment, both with the aggression of questioning on mainstream broadcast media, often if activists make it onto broadcast media, you are there to represent, the mad lefty, purple-haired climate person, whatever it is. And Piers Morgan is going to grill you on what a woman is, and all of that. And it's very hard. So this is real, right? It is very hard in some of those situations to look at the nuance. Yeah. Social media, the same. I've seen 3 examples just in the last week where someone was trying to see both sides of things and bang, absolutely got hammered for it.
On social media, someone was attempting nuance. Nuance? No, look, this is I used to have to go on the telly. I will not do this anymore. Someone who tries to get me to do this can sod off. I used to have to go on the telly and talk about things like nuclear power. There's an example, right? Nuclear power. And they'd have you on and they'd be like, right, nuclear power, is that good? And you'd be there, and you'd before you go on the telly, you'd have to talk to your press officer, and you'd go right, what is this? What am I going to say? And they'd go, oh, you got to say it's bad. I'm like, oh, okay, all right. And they go, here's 3 reasons why you got to say it's bad. I'm like, all right, you get them reasons across. And I'm like, I don't know if nuclear power is good. I'm not a sodding electrical systems engineer. I haven't I haven't read this.
This was you working for a climate campaign group.
That's just an example. All of this stuff. This is why I felt so seen. For the first 10 years of my career, I was a professional environmental campaigner for a big environmental charity, and you were not allowed. I can think of very few occasions where you were allowed to be anything other than A, certain, and B, protest voicey. So very here is a moral case with moral force, I say this certain thing. That is your job. And inside me, I was going, I don't know, or I think it's more complicated than that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this is genuinely difficult, isn't it? There's a genuine tension here. And I think there are circumstances, for example, an organisation trying to elbow its way into the news agenda, and you get your 3 minutes of going on, there's an argument for just having to make a really clear statement in that situation. I think often though, but that is part of that whole model of kind of direct influencing that I just think the situation we're in now, where the challenge actually is organising and making connections and building relationships, it really, really doesn't work for that. And that's why in this moment, I think it's quite important to think about it.
Your brain on climate.
Welcome back to Your Brain on Climate. I'm Dave, and in this episode I'm talking to the author and brilliant brain that is Anthea Lawson, author of the new book, How Not to Save the World. Anthea's been telling us all about the unconscious script used by activists, both left-leaning and right-leaning, to be fair, which guides patterns of behaviour that she worries burns out activists and helps to push people away, not winning them over. Now, we're going to canter through a couple more of the 7 items on Anthea's script in a minute. But before we go any further, I want to take just a second for a tangent. Now, there's a research company called More in Common. It's got a definition of what it calls progressive activists, which it says is about 10%, no more, of the population. It's kind of a broad grouping based on people's identities and values and cultural idea. In this 10% of progressive activists, if you fit this definition, and the odds are if you listen to this show, you might, then you think things like immigration is a force for good, just stop oil are a good thing and are justified, and that if someone's got a problematic political view, then you might not want to give them a public platform. There's nothing wrong with believing these things. I believe a lot of these things. But the thing that progressive activists are particularly bad at is realising that most other people in Britain do not think those things, at least nowhere near as strongly as they do. The truth is, a progressive activist is an outlier on most things. They are, sort of statistically speaking, weird. It's quite remarkable when you look at the charts. And we've talked before, I had an episode with Deborah Prentice all about the phenomenon of pluralistic ignorance. When you think everyone else thinks differently to you, so you don't speak up, but you're wrong about that. Well, progressive activists have got that in reverse. They're much more likely to think other people agree with them and that their views are, culturally speaking, normal than they in fact are. And progressive activists are less likely than anyone else to want to work with people who they think have different views to them. So that's a kind of dangerous combination that can lead you to get other people wrong and to misunderstand how best to build bridges with other people. And I'm not saying any of this to have a pop. I'm hardly in a position to do that. But it is to ask some questions, right? Like in our polarising politics, if there's this subconscious script that Anthea's talking about that tells you that you're right and you need to call out other people who you think are wrong and you've got some kind of moral high ground to do so, when in fact most people don't think the same as you, there's a really high chance you're going to push away more people than you attract. So your point 5 on your script is about the saviour mentality, and you call it "I save people." Say more about that.
Yeah, so this is the chapter that I really wanted. It's funny, this was the one that made me want to write the book. And then I was like, hang on, there's loads more than this. So this is specifically a chapter about, let's call it the saviour complex. The idea that we can save people and that that's our task to do so. But really the whole book is about that, and arguably all of the other chapters are components of it, because they all feed into this idea. Now, the psychological reasons that we might be trying to save, are multiple. We might be trying to make things okay, to feel that things are okay within us, because, earlier in our life, we might, that in the time when we were how we think and see things are being shaped, which is, quite young, things might not have been sort of ordered and safe and straightforward. And we might want to be making our external environment, or helping others, and these are, people who are in helping professions know very well that, there are, there's the goodness of wanting to help other people, and, that's pure and lovely, and that's great. And it can come with some stuff from within, some extra stuff from within. And the trick, if you're, in a job where you're doing that full time, is to, so psychotherapists, for example, have to get to grips of which bits of it is their stuff, and which bits of it is actually being there for someone else on their own terms, and not on your own terms. So there's all of that. And then we've got the crashing imperial hangover that Britain is still very much in the throes of. This is a really, really, painful, dry mouth, headache, groaning situation. We are really, really, really we've barely begun to grapple with the long afterlives of empire and how it's still playing out. We're still in a situation materially where the global economy is imperial. Far more money is transferred out of the poorest countries, those who were formerly colonized, and into the rich world than goes in aid, or went in aid even long before the aid cuts, like a multiple. I mean, there are different ways of measuring this, and people argue about it. We don't need to get into it now. There are so many ways in the way that the economy works, of trade rules, debt, interest, illicit flows, the way that multinationals structure their tax via tax havens set up mostly by Britain as its empire was failing, and it started up a second empire so it can continue extracting money. All of that's going on. And then, so that's the international picture. And then within Britain, there's class, which, Blair said it had gone away and we're classless. No, we're not. And so this idea of saving permeates and is, in fact, the structure of a lot of the formal organisations that are still set up to help. And so when you were mentioning that the NGOs are largely white and middle class, and that's true. And so that's all part of it. And so these structures are baked in. Now, within international development, so internationally, help going to people in other countries and humanitarianism, there has been quite an active discussion about white saviorism over the last decade. Certain things have changed. Comic relief don't do kind of celebrity goes and gets pictured with African children anymore. They get films made by local filmmakers in the countries where they're doing the projects. There are some superficial changes like that, which is great, and belated, because the recipients of aid have been saying for decades that this whole system was set up kind of in the wake of empire and not really changed. It was just sort of different organisations, but there is still so little talking about the nature of that relationship and how it might affect other forms of change making. I think it's baked into all sorts of thinking about climate activism, and the kind of the middle class perceptions of what climate work needs to look like.
Well, and you say this thing, there's a quote in the book, I haven't noted who it's from, but the quote says, "We objectify and control others out of a desire to ease this inner pain that we feel around our own privilege." So the idea being, I definitely see a lot of this in climate activism, that we're trying to sort of get other people to change their behaviour or in some way kind of act on other people, because we haven't really looked at the fact that we're like massive hypocrites ourselves, and we're kind of we as the middle class, is what I am, are the problem here. So it's kind of not even a lot of this sort of trying to save other people stuff is a sort of not really having looked at what's going on inside ourselves.
Right, and not having looked at structurally what's going on, which is that, a lot of the solutions, the solutioneering that's gone on in climate discourse has been around consumer solutions, and, stuff that you can buy, like get yourself onto solar panels and electric vehicles and all of that, which is quite a limited way of looking at it. And it's not then surprising that those, because we have got a real problem now, because all of this stuff is being weaponized by Reform and other parties that don't, that are in the pay of fossil fuels basically and don't want climate action. And they're using it they're using it as a wedge as well. There's two reasons they're doing it, but we're really vulnerable to that. The climate movement is very vulnerable to that, having taken this approach. Whereas if it had taken an approach of, I don't want to say this with like sort of hindsight, because it sounds like I'm just sort of whacking people over the head with like stuff that I've been involved in. But look, let's look at what would be more useful from now. What if it was to say what we need is public transport? What if you absolutely focused on that? Make it look different. Make it otherwise. Somebody gave me I can't remember the exact form of words, but it was just like, otherwise it's the same old shit but solar powered. It's that. So this kind of saving idea, it's not like a direct, I'm trying to save something, although sometimes it is, but it does, in the way that it affects things, it goes far beyond that kind of simple idea. But the other thing I don't want to do is give, to people listening to this going, oh God, I'm going to go into a guilt thing now about, what can I do? Because that kind of, I've got some privilege, I've got some resources still, just about, what can I do to help when, I'm being told that I'm part of the problem? And that's where the antidotes to saving come in, which is the job is not sorting it all out yourself. It's giving service. A useful antidote to the saving idea is giving service. Just as a useful antidote to the protest voice is listening. So what about if, with an idea of giving service and with an idea of listening, you were to show up in your community and see what might be needed? That other way around, rather than I've got to solve it all myself, and you either then sort of end up wading in with some hero stuff, or much more likely, because what I really wanted to show is this script works in its inverse as well. It attracts the small minority of people who consider themselves activists and who are susceptible to that sort of psychological kind of structure. And for 90% of people, and we know that's about the number from that More in Common report about progressive activists, we're about 10% of the population who see things like this and take this kind of action. For 90% of people, the script keeps them away. And that was one of my really big motivations in wanting to unpack the script and show what the alternatives to it are, and why with the publishers we have, the blurb on the back of the book and the way that what it'll say about it on my website and the framing of it is, do you want to take action? Not even that. Are you worried about the state of the world, but you don't like the look of those activists and can't see yourself in that? We framed it through that because I feel like the people who already see themselves as taking action will find it anyway if it's going to be useful for them. But I wanted to try and show that it doesn't have to be this cliche that A, runs in the culture, and B, definitely affects the Daily Mail's headline writers when they're writing about the protests that we get up to, all of which, reinforces the trope, both inside and outside.
Anthea, I am an old bastard these days, and I am not making any assumptions about your age or bastardliness or anything. Neither of us are as young as we used to be, and we've both been doing this for a while, right? And could we not just be coming across as a couple of old people who are tired and have had their midlife crisis and need to stop giving advice to young people on how to change the world, please?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And I was thinking about it the whole time I was writing it. And I even went and talked to some psychologists about this because I really want to take this seriously. I think that this is not just for younger people, actually. I think it's for all of us. That's one thing to say. I think all of the stuff I'm writing about totally applies to me and people I know who are older than me. I'd also say that some of the antidotes that I'm sharing here, crowdsourced wisdom from great activists, wonderful people who are doing really great work, comes from people who are much younger than me. I in some ways, while I did want to catch people who are coming into it for the first time, and actually people coming into political life for the first time at the moment in our fraught situation are of all ages. That's also true. I wanted to write something that works for everyone. So yes, it could be said, it could look like that. And I think it's much more complicated than that.
Yeah, and what I like about there's a bit in the book when you say, to an extent, it is right to look at the world, particularly when you first become politically aware and sort of build an identity, to look at the world and go, well, this is all a bit screwed up, and get angry about it. That's going to happen. That's inevitable. And that's a force that's kind of there. And it's also right, when you've been doing it for a bit, to step back and go, hang on a minute, does that work? And both these, you need both these things. It's not, it's inevitable.
That's right. We're all part of the ecosystem of it. And I think there's people I know who've been doing it a long time. Most of us have cycled in and out of periods of intense organising and making stuff happen, and then periods where you're slightly more reflective, and people, come in and out, through their life. And I wanted to find but also a lot of people step away because they do get burnt out, and so that is real, that happens, and that's why I wanted to share some wisdom from people who have been in it a long time. About how you might be able to do that.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Your Brain on Climate. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, you absolutely must check out Anthea's book. We really did only skim the surface of the fascinating stuff in there. I commend it to you in the highest terms, and not just because I'm in it. If you like the show, please do consider chipping in over at the Patreon, patreon.com/yourbrainonclimate. Just a quid or two will make this old man very happy and help keep this show on the road. Okay, I will be back soon, and until then, look after yourself, and I will see you when I see you. Okay, bye-bye. Bye now. You hang up this time. Your turn to hang up. Okay, bye.